When the Tranny Roadshow got started, we didn't know what it would be. The tagline that we used, I think, throughout was that the Tranny Roadshow was a multimedia performance art extravaganza with an all-transgender cast. So I think I'll back up to where it started before what it became. I was 22. Youth is crucial to this story because there was some naivete that came with that was helpful. I was living in rural Maine for the winter doing a house painting job. I knew absolutely nobody in town except for the person I was working for. It was Maine and it was the winter and you could barely leave your house and there was nothing at all to do. So I had all this time to sort of imagine what I wanted to do next. I decided that what I wanted to do next was go on tour. And that was a very nebulous concept at the time. I had never been on tour.
Had you done performance stuff before?
Not much. I grew up playing violin, so I had done like recitals. You know, I had done theater in high school, but I had never really been a performer as such. Certainly not the kind who goes on tour by themselves. But I had some friends who'd gone on tour and it seemed fun. And I wasn't sure what I would do on tour or where I would go or who I would do it with, but it seemed like a good idea. So I called my friend Kelly Costello, but his sort of performance name is Kelly Short and Queer. I knew that we worked well together. I called up and said, hey, do you want to go on tour with me? And he's sort of like, what would that mean? Well, I don't know, but we can figure it out. We were both writers and zinesters, and if nothing else, it could be a zine reading tour. Like, we had friends who'd done that. That seemed viable. But then we thought, wouldn't it be more interesting if it was more than just zine reading? Could we get somebody else involved who did something different? And 3 people seemed sort of ideal. You can fit in a car comfortably. Somebody can lay down in the back. Like, well, we'll aim for 3 people. How do we find a third person? We had nobody in mind. Like, well, we should think of a theme and then look for somebody who fits that theme. Like, what's our theme? Like, well, I'm trans, you're trans. Let's have a trans theme. And that was really all the thinking that went into that. We drafted an email, just a paragraph or 2, about this show that we had imagined and what it could be, and sent it to our friends and said, forward to your friends. And this is before Facebook. There wasn't sort of social media spreading. It was all by email forwards. Like, well, we'll send this out and see what happens. Within a week, we had gotten back more than 100 replies. Wow. And that included people who wanted to perform, people who wanted to book the show, people who wanted to make our flyers, people who said, I own a restaurant. If you come to my town, I'll give you a meal while you're here. Wow. People who wanted us to stay in their house. It was just all these people saying, this needs to happen. How can we help make it happen? This need for trans performance art and specifically for trans performance art that got out of the big cities. That wasn't just in New York or San Francisco, but that was going into the middle of America and reaching people where they are and building community. So the original vision was something very different than what the show eventually became. Yeah. We started planning in late 2004, and the first tour was in the spring of 2005.
So what kind of performances did you have in that first tour?
So it was in a variety show format. Yeah. And we really wanted there to be variety. Throughout both the first tour and the years that followed, every show included some kinds of spoken word performance, every show included some kind of music, and every show included something else. Excerpts from plays, dance, we had a juggler one year, we had a magician, we had a professional opera singer. We toured from 2005 through 2012. Okay.
You mentioned before that it felt like your show was life-saving for a lot of people.
I think that was probably true for people in the audience at times, and people said things like that to us sometimes. But where it feels most true and certain to me is with many of the performers. So we had, over the years, more than 100 performers involved in the show. Wow. And some of them did it over and over, year after year, and some of them did one tour, and that was it. And it was truly life-changing in pretty dramatic ways for a lot of people. Is probably in some ways directly responsible for me being here as a chaplain. Like, my sense of calling came out of that experience.
I'm so glad you say that, because that was going to be my next question. Well, because I love that, we're both chaplains, and I love that you really heard this as a call. You've been a children's hospital chaplain now for a year, and so how has that gotten you here?
It's probably less directly responsible for me being a chaplain than for me being in ministry at all. Sense of call to ministry came really pretty directly from the show. So what that looked like for me is, I was raised in church. Religion was always a really important part of my life. When I left home, unlike a lot of my peers, I did not leave church. I continued finding churches in the communities that I went to as a young adult. So religion and faith had always been important to me. And part of what I found in building trans community was how incredibly rare that was. Not that people didn't have faith or have deep spiritualities or have yearnings, but they didn't have any connection or community related to those yearnings.
Absolutely.
And I heard so many stories of deep hurt from people who had been rejected from their churches or religious communities. And we had performers who identified as, Christian and Jewish and Buddhist, but that weren't connected to practice or community. Yeah. But I needed to do something. That there was this gap between the church and the trans community. and that my call was to be in that gap as somebody who had a foot in each world and to try to make space for the rest of us.